When I first moved into the Lakeside Meadows community, I thought I had found paradise. After years of living in cramped apartments and dealing with noisy neighbors, I wanted peace, nature, and a little slice of solitude to call my own. The property I bought sat at the edge of a private lake, surrounded by tall pines and willows that dance in the wind. The sun would rise over the still water, painting everything in soft gold, and at night the frogs would croak a gentle rhythm that lulled me to sleep. It was everything I wanted, a dream realized after decades of saving and sacrificing. For the first few weeks, I was in heaven. I spent my mornings on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll off the water. I installed a small rowboat, kept to myself, and minded the community rules, at least the reasonable ones. I had no idea that one person in this neighborhood was waiting for a chance to turn my piece into paperwork. Her name was Karen Whitmore. She introduced herself the day I moved in, wearing a crisp white blouse, oversized sunglasses, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a title she wielded with the same pride and authority that a general might feel leading troops into battle. "Welcome to Lakeside Meadows," she said, her voice sugar-sweet but rehearsed. "We like to keep things orderly here. The HOA handles most matters. You'll receive our handbook in the mail." I thanked her politely, not realizing that I was talking to the most feared woman within a 5-mile radius. The neighbors called her HOA Karen behind her back, but always with hushed voices, as if saying her name too loudly might summon her with a stack of violation notices. For a while, we coexisted peacefully. I kept my yard trimmed, painted the dock in a community-approved shade of Lakewood brown, and attended the occasional HOA meeting just to show good faith. But trouble found me on a hot Saturday afternoon in late July. It was one of those perfect days when the air hangs heavy, cicadas buzz like electricity, and the lake gleams like glass. After mowing the lawn, I decided to take a swim. The water was right there, calm and inviting. I changed into my swim trunks, walked down the dock, and dove in. The cool rush of the lake enveloped me, washing away the sweat and fatigue of the day. I floated on my back, staring at the clouds, feeling utterly content. For the first time since moving, I felt completely at home. That's when I heard it, the sharp, unmistakable click of a phone camera. I turned and saw Karen standing on the far side of the fence, her arms crossed, her phone raised like a weapon. She looked like she had just caught someone committing grand larceny. "Excuse me," she shouted, marching closer. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked, confused. "Swimming," I said, gesturing to the obverse. "In my lake." Her eyebrows shot up as if I confessed to arson. "Your lake? That's community property," she snapped. I swam to the dock and climbed out, dripping water onto the planks. "Actually," I said calmly, "it's on my deed. Private access is written into it. The property line includes 20 feet into the lake." She scoffed, already typing something into her phone. "I don't care what you think your deed says. The HOA rules clearly state that the lake is a shared amenity. You're not allowed to use it for personal recreation without prior approval." I laughed, assuming she was joking. Prior approval to swim. I asked. I didn't realize I needed a permit to get wet. She frowned, her mouth tightening into a thin line. "Don't be disrespectful. I'm the HOA president. I'll be filing an incident report." I shrugged it off, figuring it was just another one of her overreactions. But a week later, I received an official letter in the mail with the HOA letterhead stamp across the top, notice of violation. Unauthorized use of community resources. Fine, $1,000. Payment due within 30 days. At first, I honestly thought it was a prank. I even called a few neighbors to see if someone was playing a joke on me, but everyone just sighed sympathetically. "She's done it before," one of them said. "Last month she fined the Simmonses for planting the wrong color flowers." Another told me she once cited a resident for leaving a garden hose visible from the street. Apparently, my little swim had become the latest entry in Karen's growing book of grievances. Still, I wasn't about to pay $1,000 for swimming in water I legally owned. I gathered my paperwork, the purchase agreement, the plat map, the deed, even a note from the previous owner confirming the lake rights, and prepared for the next HOA meeting. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, and at the front sat the HOA board, with Karen in the center like a queen presiding over her court. I waited patiently through the agenda items, budget reviews, landscaping updates, and a debate about the color of mailboxes, until the floor was open for resident concerns. When my turn came, I stood and explained the situation calmly, presenting my documents to the board. I showed them the boundary lines on the map, highlighted the clause about private access, and even cited state property law regarding water rights. Before anyone could respond, Karen interrupted. "Mr. Adams," she said sharply, "the HOA handbook clearly outlines that the lake is a shared space. You should have consulted the board before engaging in any recreational activity that could set a precedent." I held up the deed. "With respect, the deed predates the HOA. The lake isn't shared, it's private. My property line is here, clearly marked." She snatched the papers from my hand and scanned them with a theatrical sigh. "These are open to interpretation," she declared. "Just because your deed mentions a lake doesn't mean you can monopolize it." Her tone was dripping with condescension. We have to think of the community, not just one individual's sense of entitlement. I bit back my frustration. Entitlement? I'm not asking for anything from the HOA. I'm swimming in water that legally belongs to my property. You can't fine me for that. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "We can, and we have. The fine stands." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to side with her or me. A few avoided eye contact altogether. Karen had that kind of power. People feared her wrath more than they valued fairness. I left the meeting with my documents clutched in my hand, my anger simmering. That night, I sat on my dock under the moonlight, staring at the reflection rippling across the water. It was absurd, I thought, being punished for something so harmless, so human. The lake was supposed to be my sanctuary, yet now it felt like evidence in some petty bureaucratic battle. But as I sat there, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let one overzealous neighbor bully me into submission. If Karen wanted to play by the rules, I'd make sure those rules worked both ways. I knew there had to be limits to her authority. Every HOA had bylaws, checks, and financial oversight. And as I started reading through the document she so proudly enforced, I realized something she didn't expect. She'd given me the roadmap to her own undoing. For the next few weeks, I quietly gathered information. I requested copies of the HOA's financial reports, citing transparency laws that require them to provide access. I attended every meeting, sat through every tedious budget discussion, and took notes. I learned who supported her, who didn't, and who just wanted to avoid conflict. I kept my interactions polite, never showing anger, never mentioning the fine again. But in the background, I was preparing for the moment when the balance of power would shift. Karen thought she had won, that her authority was unquestionable, but she didn't realize I had patience, persistence, and the truth on my side. When I received the final reminder notice for the $1,000 fine, stamped with bold red letters, I pinned it to my refrigerator like a trophy. It wasn't defeat, it was motivation. Because the next time I walked into that clubhouse, I wouldn't just be a homeowner arguing about a swim. I'd be a man who had learned how the system worked, and how to turn it against the person misusing it. Over the next 2 months, I learned more about HOA politics than I ever cared to know. It turned out that being part of a homeowners association was less about maintaining property values and more about managing egos, alliances, and a constant stream of passive-aggressive emails. Karen, of course, sat at the top of this pyramid, reigning over every minor infraction with her iron clipboard. She thrived on control, dictating everything from acceptable lawn heights to the social appropriateness of Christmas lights after January 10th. But in her quest for power, she had grown careless. During my quiet investigation, I discovered that she had been approving her own spending increases, signing off on budget allocations without member consent, and using HOA funds for community improvements that mysteriously benefited only her property. A new stone walkway here, upgraded lighting there, all justified with vague wording like shared aesthetic enhancements. I wasn't an accountant, but I knew corruption when I saw it. And as fate would have it, an election for new board officers was coming up. I had never been a political person, but revenge is a way of sharpening your focus. I started by befriending a few of the other residents who, like me, were tired of Karen's overreach. There was Bill from 3 houses down, who'd been fined for leaving his trash can out 15 minutes too long. And Maria, a retired teacher, who once received a violation notice for excessive wind chime activity. They were skeptical at first when I told them I was running for treasurer, but when I explained I planned to bring transparency to the HOA's finances, their eyes lit up. Word spread quietly but effectively. By the time election night came, the clubhouse was packed, more people than I'd ever seen in an HOA meeting. Karen looked calm at first, flashing her trademark tight-lipped smile as she read through the agenda. But when the votes were counted and I was announced as a new treasurer, her face froze in that perfect mix of disbelief and horror. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. My first few weeks in the role were all about observation. I reviewed every line of the HOA's budget, every expenditure, every email thread between Karen and the other officers. The deeper I dug, the more questionable practices I found. There were payments to vendors who didn't exist, reimbursements to Karen for miscellaneous community expenses, and even an unapproved landscaping grant that went directly toward maintaining the private garden behind her house. It was all right there, hidden in plain sight. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I waited, quietly documenting everything. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, my retaliation wouldn't just be personal. It would be airtight, justified, and irreversible. Then came the opportunity one was waiting for. At the quarterly budget review, Karen proposed increasing HOA fees to address maintenance shortfalls. She claimed rising costs and inflation were squeezing the community's resources, and she needed an additional $5,000 annually to balance the books. It was a transparent grab for more power and more money, the kind of proposal that usually passed without resistance because no one dared to question her. But this time, the treasurer's seat belonged to me. When she finished her speech, I asked if she'd like to back up her claims with financial data. She blinked, caught off guard. "It's all in the reports," she said coolly. I smiled and clicked my laptop to project the HOA's actual expense summaries onto the screen. "Interesting," I said, "because according to these records, the only person benefiting from the last 3 budget increases is you." The room went dead silent. I scrolled through the expenses line by line, highlighting the discrepancies, the walkway, the lighting, the personal reimbursements. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Karen tried to cut me off, accusing me of misinterpreting the numbers, but this time her favorite phrase worked against her. "Interpretation goes both ways," I said evenly, echoing her word from our earlier argument. "And according to our bylaws, unauthorized personal spending is grounds for disciplinary action." The look on her face was priceless, a mix of rage and panic barely hidden behind a trembling smile. She tried to regain control, insisting we table the discussion for private review, but the residents had had enough. They demanded an immediate vote. By a unanimous decision, the board agreed to audit the HOA's finances and restructure budget under my supervision. That's when I proposed a new measure, a tiered fee system based on property privileges. It sounded fair and logical on paper. Larger properties or those benefiting from exclusive amenities would pay slightly higher fees. The motion passed easily. After all, who could argue against fairness? What I didn't mention, at least not out loud, was that Karen's property, with its private garden and community-approved upgrades, fell squarely into the highest tier. Her HOA fees would rise by exactly $5,000 a year. When the final numbers were announced, she went pale. "This is outrageous," she hissed, slamming her pen against the table. I shrugged. "It's policy," I said with a calm smile. "And as you always remind us, rules are subject to interpretation." In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without Karen micromanaging every blade of grass, people started relaxing. Yards grew a little wilder, laughter returned to the streets, and weekend barbecues popped up again without fear of being out of compliance. As for me, I enjoyed every quiet morning on my dock, swimming freely in my lake without interruption. Occasionally, I'd see Karen sitting on her porch, staring bitterly across the water, her clipboard gone but her glare as sharp as ever. Sometimes I'd wave. She never waved back. I didn't need her approval anymore. The fine she tried to use to humiliate me had turned into the catalyst for her downfall, poetic justice in its purest form. But perhaps the sweetest part wasn't the victory itself. It was how effortlessly it had unfolded once I stopped playing defense. I realized that people like Karen thrived on intimidation. They built their authority not on fairness or logic, but on fear. The moment that fear evaporated, their control crumbled. By the time the annual HOA report was released, the community had fully turned against her. Her mismanagement was officially documented, and though she avoided legal trouble, thanks to a conveniently timed resignation, her reputation was beyond repair. She moved out 2 months later, citing personal reasons. The day her moving truck pulled away, several neighbors gathered by the lakeside to celebrate with lemonade and pie. Someone joked about hosting a Karen-free swim party, and the idea stuck. By sunset, half the neighborhood was in the water, laughing, splashing, reclaiming the lake she once guarded so jealously. As I floated on my back under the fading orange sky, I couldn't help but think about how the whole ordeal had started. One petty fine, one power-hungry woman, and one stubborn homeowner who refused to bow. Life has a funny way of balancing itself out when you stand your ground. What had begun as a frustrating battle over a swim had turned into something far bigger, a lesson in patience, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of letting justice unfold naturally. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I preferred the kind that whispered, that settled into the bones of a story people would tell long after we were gone. Remember when Karen tried to fine Tom for swimming in his own lake? They'd say, "Yeah, and he ended up raising her fees instead." And I'd smile every time I heard it, because that lake, that moment, and that victory would always belong to me, fair and square.